as I said, so it's another Mechavir. I felt this time of year, obviously during the summer months, Hamazanah, it's Rosh Chodesh. So I'll say the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. So it's well known that means that Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt through Avos Yisrael, through Avos Chinam. And so I figure it's appropriate. We'll learn some sugyas of Mitzvos Bein Adam L'Chavero during this time, as the flyer says in Halacha and Pnimi. So I'm going to try to stick with that. So it's like this, a little bit of just a couple words of introduction in terms of like sort of the structure of how I wanted to do this. So it's like this. Throughout Shulchan Aruch, you'll have there's a lot of mitzvahs bin adam l'chaver. They cover a wide range of experiences. Some of those mitzvahs are spoken about at length in Shulchan Aruch. Probably the one mitzvah which is probably talked about in as great detail as anything else is tzedakah, for example. So tzedakah, so you have a whole section of Shulchan Aruch about that. But there's many other mitzvahs that are bin adam l'chaver that are maybe referenced here and there, but are not really. We don't have like full siman in the Shulchan Aruch about it. But Baruch Hashem, one of the major contributions that the Chofetz Chaim brought to the world, amongst other things, is an unbelievable sefer called Avos Chesed. Right. So what's Avos Chesed? So everyone knows the Mishavura. So the Mishavura is an amazing accomplishment on Shulchan Aruch. And you have the sefer Chofetz Chaim, which is also an amazing thing. What he did was that he basically created a Shulchan Aruch on Hilchos Lashon Hara, like out of thin air, And so that's well known. The sefer Avos Chesed is also what the Chofetz Chaim did to sort of create a Shulchan Aruch on Mitzvos Bein Adam L'Chavero also. He's not making things up, but he's just like gathering together from Kol Torah Kula. It's an amazing thing. So we're going to see throughout our learning over the next number of weeks the halacha l'maisa of it. A lot of it is going to be based on the Chofetz Chaim in Avos Chesed, but at least for the most part, we'll sort of at least go with his model in terms of at least picking which mitzvahs to go first and second and so on. So the first mitzvah, again, I don't know why, but this is just happens to be with the Chofetz Chaim. The first mitzvah that he talks about in the Sefer Avos Chesed is the mitzvah of halva. So the mitzvah Bein Adam L'Chaver, the mitzvah of lending a Jew money. If a person needs to borrow money, we'll see there's a mitzvah to lend money to another Jew. That's the first mitzvah he talks about. So I figured, if it's number one for the Chofetz Chaim, it's good enough for us too. So that's what we'll talk about. So tonight, that's the Marmar comments that you have is about this mitzvah of halva, the mitzvah of lending another Jew money. So tonight we'll learn, it won't be too long, we'll learn about sort of the general idea of what this mitzvah is, in halacha and the pnimis of this time. And then next week, we'll see more of the details, the halacha l'maisa that comes out, that comes from this mitzvah. Tonight's going to be more of a general idea of what this mitzvah is. So, but again, we're going to take it from ground zero, okay? So mamash, where this mitzvah is coming from in Chumash, and see where it leads us. So, okay, let's start right away. So, Maramakum number 1. So you have, it's all coming from a pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim. Right? Parshas Mishpatim has many mitzvahs ben adam l'chaver. So the pasuk says, it's middle of Parshas Mishpatim. The truth is, it's interesting. The way we have our minhag, it's not just like Ashkenazim, it's like all of Klal Yisrael at this point. Parshas Mishpatim is one big parsha. So it's, Parshas B'Shalach, Yisrael, Mishpatim, and then Truma. So Mishpatim is one parsha. By the times of the Ga'ainim and early Rishonim, even like to mid Rishonim, we find such a thing that there were many communities that Parshas Mishpatim is divided into two. What they would call Parshas Mishpatim was the first half of Parshas Mishpatim, and then there was another parsha. The following week, they were laying Parshas in Kesef. That's what it was called, and that's the beginning. That's this pasuk that we're about to read is sort of the beginning of that second half of Parshas Mishpatim. So that's just unrelated to anything, just a nice piece of trivia. Anyway, so the pasuk says like this: in Parshas Mishpatim, in Kesef, I'll touch the pasuk as it simply reads, and then we'll see how Chazal learn it. In Kesef Talvas Ami Esa'ani Imach, if you lend money, says Hashem through Moshe Rabbeinu, if you lend money to my people, to the poor amongst you, you shouldn't be like a harsh lender where you put pressure on the person to pay back quickly and as soon as possible you put pressure on them. You shouldn't do that. And not only should you not put pressure on the person that borrowed the money, you should also not charge interest for it. You shouldn't put neshach, ribis, you shouldn't charge ribis. Okay, that's the pasuk. So you read it kipshutai on a simple level. What the pasuk is introducing us to are two prohibitions. Prohibition number 1 is what? is not to put a lender. If you lend money to my people, to poor Yidden, you shouldn't put pressure on them. So that's prohibition number one, not to put pressure as a lender to the borrower. And prohibition number two, not to charge interest. Right? That's the pasuk says. Now the Medrash, Marmukah number 2, Chazal come and say, no, the truth is besides the two prohibitions in this pasuk, there's also a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to lend money. The mitzvah is to lend in kesef talves amias animach. Even though the simple reading of it would be, if you choose to lend money to my people, to poor Yidden, then you have to follow these halachas of not putting pressure and not charging interest. Chazal darshan, they know it's not a rishus, it's not something that's up to you. There's a mitzvah to lend money. It says the Medrash in Marmukah number 2, it's a mechilta. Mechilta is the name for the Medrash in Sefer Shmais. So Medrash halacha. So it says like this: Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Rabbi Shmuel said, "Kol im ve'im shevetayra." Usually, with the word "im" means rishus. It means if. If you want, yes. If not, not. It's up to you. Chutz mizeh, except for this im kesef talvas ami. Even though it might you could translate it as if. That's not the translation over here. Over here, the translation is when. In other words, you for sure have to lend money if someone asks of you. Im kesef talvas ami. When you lend money to my people, to poor Yidden, then you have to follow these other halachas too, but it's an assumption that you have to lend money. It's a mitzvah itself. Chutz mizeh, this im is a chiyuv. Vayit shnaim, another two examples also in Chumash where it says the word im, but it's not voluntary. It's not if. It's when. It gives the example im takriv minchas bikurim. It says in pasuk that there's special korbanos to bring on Shavuos. They call them the mincha, the offering of bikurim. So it says if you bring the offering of bikurim, it's not if. Means when you have no choice. It says the word in, but it really means you have to. Chayva, it's an obligation. Kiyotzabai, another example. The third example is im mizbach avarim tasali. It says the pasuk, if you build for me a mizbeach of stone, then don't use metal to carve the stone. So it sounds like you don't have to build a mizbeach. If you do, then this is the halachas. Say Chazal, no, that's another example. It says the word if, but it doesn't. It means when. When you build a mizbeach of stone and so on, then you can't use metal to carve it. Okay, so these are the three examples where it says the word im, but it means you have to. Okay, so again, going back, so it says im kesef talvos ami. It's not a voluntary thing. You have to. It's a mitzvah to lend money to a Jew, to a poor Jew. Now the Medrash explains, how do I know this from? Focusing on our pasuk. How do I know that when it says im kesef talvos ami, it means you have to, and it doesn't mean if, and it's voluntary. So says the Medrash, Rabbi Shmuel points us to a different pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. Another pasuk which says habi tabitenu, that pasuk tells us that for sure there's an obligation to lend a Jew money, and it's not a voluntary thing. What is this pasuk of habi tabitenu? So in Marmukah number 3, in Parshas Re'eh. So this pasuk is talking about the mitzvah of tzedakah, giving tzedakah in general. So the pasuk says like this: if there's a poor person amongst your brothers, so there's a poor yid. So it says in pasuk, you have to open up your hand to give him tzedakah. That's the mitzvah of tzedakah. And then the pasuk continues, and lend him money if that's what he requests. If he needs a mamish tzedakah, then you give him that. If he doesn't want to receive tzedakah, but he's willing to receive a loan, habi tabitenu, you should lend him money as well. Dei machsar, anything he needs, ashiyach salei, all of his things that he needs, whatever he needs, that's what you should do. So says, going back to the mechilta, so says Rabbi Shmuel, no. So how do I know when it says im kesef talvos ami? How do you know that it means an obligation? Because there's a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh which pretty much openly says it. It says that you have to give tzedakah. And it says, even without besides tzedakah, you also have to lend a person money if that's what they're asking for. Right? So when it says im kesef talvos ami, it means it's a mitzvah. Okay, and that's the mitzvah. Now the truth is, just a little bit on the side, just to know, this is not the opinion of all of Chazal. This is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. There are opinions in Chazal not like this, that say that no, im kesef talvos ami is in fact not a mitzvah. It's just, it means if you choose to lend money, then you have to follow with the following halachas. But there's no mitzvah to do it. According to those opinions, when the pasuk says in Parshas Re'eh that you have to give tzedakah and also lend money, so the way those opinions in Chazal interpret it is that it still just means regular giving tzedakah. It's just sometimes if the person is a little bit ashamed to receive tzedakah, so you tell them, no, it's just a loan, but you never really have any intention of collecting it. So really it's tzedakah, it's just, packaged and clothed, and disguised as a loan, but really it means tzedakah. So that there's a opinion like that. But Lamaisa, the consensus of most opinions, most Rishonim, we'll see in Shulchan Aruch as well, is that we pass like Rabbi Shmuel, Im Kesef Talvasami is a mitzvah, there's a chiyuv to lend money to a Jew, to a poor Jew, we'll see about who exactly, when they request it. Okay. Now listen, it goes without saying, this doesn't mean that a person has to go looking for people to lend money to. We're talking about if a person comes to you, and we'll see exactly what the situation is, and they ask for a loan, then there is a mitzvah to give. Okay, we'll see how much, what situations that we'll see. Okay, but first question we have to deal with is that what exactly is the fundamental principle that's driving this mitzvah? So, in other words, this mitzvah is targeting a specific scenario, right? A guy is asking for a loan, so it's mitzvah to give him. The truth is, if we didn't know of such a mitzvah, let's say in Kesef Talvasami, didn't exist, and I were to ask you, a Jew comes to ask for a loan, is there a mitzvah to lend him money? So there would probably, in our mind, we would probably come up with two general mitzvahs that situation might be covered by, right? One mitzvah is chesed. If you have to rach kamoicha, if you have to rach kamoicha, you have certain mitzvahs which are specific, they target particular situations. And then you have mitzvahs which are sort of open categories that cover a lot of areas. And the Haftar Echad is one of them. Nowhere in Chumash, there is no mitzvah in 613 that says you have to go do Bikur Chayla. It's not in 613, according to most opinions. There's no mitzvah of Halvayas HaMeis, of going to a funeral and so on in 613. So, but those are mitzvahs. Why? Because they're covered under, there's a general category of you have the Rech D'Moich. So I think we would probably all assume that if a guy comes to you that needs a loan, right, that situation certainly would be part of the general category of you have the Rech D'Moich. So we would probably call this certainly in the category of Chesed. There's another general mitzvah that we would probably also associate this situation with, which is tzedakah also, right? So it might not be the classical case of tzedakah, which is literally giving charity to a person, but tzedakah is, again, as opposed to pesayich, tiftach, like open up your hand. Let's say I don't have the money, but I know someone else that can give tzedakah and make the phone call for him. That's also tzedakah. It's also in the category of tzedakah. So the question we have to think about is like this. This scenario of lending money, number one, would we have known it already? And under what category would we have known it? And if we would know it already, what do you need this specific pasuk for? So let's go slow. So if you take a look at Maramukah number 4, the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvos quotes this mitzvah of Kesef Talvasami, and let's see how the Rambam describes it and how he formulates it over there, and we'll see what the definition of the mitzvah is. So it says the Rambam mitzvah Kuf Tzadi Zayin. Shetzivanu. So we're commanded in this pasuk of Kesef Talvasami lahalvos lani, to lend money to a poor person, laharchiv loi, to give him some wiggle room financially, ulhakul inyana, to alleviate some of his pressure. Umitzvah zu, says the Rambam, this mitzvah, listen to the language. Hi hayoser chazaka v'yoser mechuyeves mikol mitzvah tzedakah. This is the most obligatory, the most important mitzvah from within the mitzvah of tzedakah. Why? Says the Rambam, Kamishan is baza v'gila pon of lishol midei nashim. Because if you have a person that's already gotten to a point of where he's literally going collecting from people, so it's like the classic case of tzedakah, ain't saras inyanei sarmi olav. Then even if you give him charity, you give him some tzedakah and you alleviate a little bit of his pressure, you're certainly not fixing his situation in general. Because first of all, he's already in a state of bizayin. And probably what you're giving him is not going to be enough to cover him next week. So you're not really fixing all of his problems. It's a gewaltige thing that you're doing right now, but you're not fixing all of his problems. But this person in our case, of where he's not asking for tzedakah, but he's asking for a loan, so that means that most likely it's not in such a bad matzav right now. So you have the opportunity, first of all, before he becomes really embarrassed of his situation, you have the opportunity to save him from that embarrassment. And number two, you have the opportunity to really help him get up on his feet, where you won't have to be in a situation where he'll constantly be looking for money. So there's a lot. So in other words, so this scenario of lending a person money is the greatest tzedakah of all, says the Rambam, because you accomplish so much more than a person that's already down on his luck. So it says the Rambam, Kamaya Mechusa, like this person who's already hiding. In other words, he does, his difficulty is not out in the open so much. Shir Tzeleyazer, that he wants to be helped, but actually is galing, that his pain is not revealed yet. His difficulties are not revealed yet. He's bazin, and he won't be embarrassed if you just give him that loan. So in other words, it says the Rambam. So comparatively speaking, this situation of lending a Jew money before he gets, really in a difficult situation is mamish the best, because you first of all, you could accomplish a lot with the little loan that you're giving him. And number two, by accomplishing that, he doesn't find himself in a situation of embarrassment. But here's the point. With the way the Rambam described it as a what? Again, going back to the first line. Mitzvos to the end of the first line. Mitzvos of this mitzvah, again, of lending money. It's the greatest, the most necessary situation, within the context of giving tzedakah. What the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvos, what the Rambam seems to be telling us is that if you have to classify what exactly is this mitzvah, where is it coming from, in terms of general mitzvahs. So the Rambam seems to be telling us in Sefer Mitzvahs that this mitzvah of lending money is of the category of tzedakah. So you have a general category of tzedakah, which is B'sayach tiftach es yad chaloi. Open up your hands, help the person out. What does that mean? Kind of vague, open-ended. But now you have the Torah going within that category of tzedakah. I am now pinpointing and specifying a particular situation to create that as its own individual mitzvah within that larger context of tzedakah, and that is lending money. And by doing so, let's appreciate that, by doing so, when the Torah pinpoints and specifies this particular situation, although it might have been part of the general concept of tzedakah to begin with, there's a big nafkamina that comes with that. Why? The nafkamina is as follows. Whenever you have a mitzvah that's sort of open-ended, and there's many different ways to fulfill that mitzvah, so it's kind of up to you to decide what way you want to fulfill it. So let's say, for example, you leave your house and you have two people waiting by your front door. One person tells you, "Come with me. We're going to go to the hospital to be Mevakar Chaim." And the other one says, "Come with me. We're going to go to a shiva house to be Menachem Avim." Which one do you go to? Technically speaking, which mitzvahs? Is there one of the 613 to be Mevakar Chaim? No. Is there one of the 613 to be Menachem Avim? No. They're both part of one mitzvah, which is V'yahavta l'recha k'maycha. Now, if you look in Chazal, sometimes will you find in Chazal that this inyan is a more chashuv inyan? Yeah. So let's say you'll find in Chazal that, I don't know, Bikkur Chaylim is better. There's more, you're helping him better, whatever the situation is. Maybe there's more milas in Bikkur Chaylim. And let's say you go the other way. Are you doing something really wrong? Are you not being Mekayim the mitzvah V'yahavta l'recha k'maycha properly? You are. Okay. There's certain milas of one over the other. It's kind of open-ended. So whenever you have a mitzvah that's open-ended, even if you and you have different opportunities to be Mekayim that general mitzvah, first of all, it's up to you to decide which way we want to fulfill it. And number two, even if you'll find in Chazal a certain hierarchy, it's not the end of the world if you go against that hierarchy, because at the end of the day, it's all part of one big mitzvah anyway. But if you have a general mitzvah, but there's one particular situation that's targeted by the pasuk and says, okay, general mitzvah true, but I'm pulling out this particular situation to be explicit, to do that, then not only is that particular situation just part of the general mitzvah, the pasuk is telling you now that is something that you have to do. In other words, we have the general mitzvah of tzedakah, let's say, and says the Rambam, but within the general mitzvah of tzedakah, the pasuk is pinpointing lending a poor person money. So now, what you have based on this is a new halacha, which is you wake up in the morning, come out of your door, and there's two people. One person says to you, "I have and the money that you're able to let go of that day is $100. You can't push yourself any more than that. It's $100. But you have two opportunities. You could give $100 to a poor person that's just pasha collecting tzedakah, or you could give that $100 as a loan to someone that needs to borrow that $100. Now he also needs to borrow it to get back up on his feet, but he just wants to borrow it. So which one do you do? They're both tzedakah. And what's interesting is that probably if we were thinking just for ourselves, we would probably say, I'd rather give the guy that wants a tzedakah, he's in a worse matzah. But now that the pasuk specifies, yes, there's a general mitzvah tzedakah, but you know what? Besides the general, im kesef talvis ami, it means that this particular situation of lending money to help a poor person is not just a nice milah or a particular, situation that's covered by the general mitzvah. It's being specified, and if it's being specified, it means that's how you have to fulfill the mitzvah tzedakah if the situation arises. And if you don't choose that, it means on some level you're being mavatal the mitzvah tzedakah. So it's not just like you chose incorrectly, but you know what, you gave tzedakah anyway. No, that's mamish incorrect. So this is what we're seeing in the Rambam. So again, to know, that's what I'm saying, to know specifically what category generally this mitzvah is coming from is important. And so says the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvos, how do we understand this mitzvah? So in Sefer Mitzvos, the Rambam holds, again, you have a general mitzvah of tzedakah, and you have a particular mitzvah within that general world of tzedakah, the particular mitzvah of lending money. And the nafkamina that creates for us is that now that you have a general open-ended mitzvah of tzedakah, which until now was up to you to fulfill in any which way you wanted, now you're being governed and being guided. Generally speaking, it's up to you how to fulfill your mitzvah tzedakah, but if this particular situation arises and you only have X amount of money to use for tzedakah, this is a situation to pick. Im kesef talvasam. That's the opinion of the Rambam.
Over the one who needs it?
Over the one that is just asking for tzedakah. That's the chiddush. That would be the side of the Rambam. Now, yeah.
The Rambam builds it, where's the Rambam built the Harsham Bled Hikal which he continues on it, that's why it's a greater mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
The Pasuk says it's in Kesef Talvasami, it's on Imach.
Right.
Where's he learning? And then the next part I was going to say is that the next part of the pasuk is that in general and given place the connection.
Right. So that's true. So if you go back to the pasuk again, so let's break it down. According to the Rambam, when now if we could identify that this mitzvah is within the context of tzedakah, so now we know that obviously tzedakah means to a poor person. So according to the Rambam, this is a mitzvah. Obviously, if you lend money to a wealthy person that just happens to need cash on him, right? So it's chesed, you're doing a chesed. But the mitzvah in kesef talvasami, because the Rambam holds it's a tzedakah mitzvah, so it applies to an ani. That's what those are the words of the Rambam. Shetzivanu lahalves la'ani. We're commanded to lend to an ani. Now, going back to the beginning of the pasuk itself, it's not so clear because it says in kesef talve es ami es animach, that you should lend money to my people, to the poor amongst you. No, so it's a little bit vague. What does that mean exactly? Does that include people that are not as poor? So the Rambam certainly is understanding that this mitzvah is being directed to people that are poor, but he is acknowledging that we're not talking about a person that's of such poverty that he's already collecting money for tzedakah. So he's within the context of an ani, but it's not the classic ani that we think of tzedakah, and that's called an ani. So maybe that's what it means as ami, as ani imach. Certainly the next part of the pasuk, which is when you lend, don't be aggressive about it and don't lend ribbis, don't charge ribbis, that applies to everyone. But in terms of the beginning, according to the Rambam, it's tzedakah. And it's like that.
It sounds like it's an ani that's part of this society, not like a guy who's begging on the street. It's like he's part of
a particular yid that's coming over to you to ask for a loan because he needs it and so on, but he's not in the classical situation of asking for money, of collecting. Now, fine. Now a little bit on this side, as we'll go on to see a couple more shittas about this. Every sheet of the Rishonim has its source. So again, this is just in parentheses because we're not going to go through it in too much detail. How the Rambam know this, or what's a little? I can't say it's a mamish proof, but a little bit of a source of how we see in Chazal that this mitzvah is a tzedakah-oriented mitzvah. So the truth is, the medrash that we saw in Marmukah number 2, that Rabbi Shmuel proved that this is in fact a mitzvah. He referenced us. He brought us to a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh to prove to us that in fact there's a mitzvah of lending money, and that pasuk of Habi Tabitanu, right? That pasuk is talking about tzedakah for sure. So you could definitely make the argument, and this is probably where the Rambam is coming from, is that if the whole source of this mitzvah in Kesef Talvasami is because of a cross-reference to Parshas Re'eh, which that is talking about tzedakah, so most likely this is also a tzedakah concept. Okay, that's the opinion of the Rambam. Fine. Other extreme. The other extreme is the opinion of the Tur. Okay, the Tur in Choshen Mishpat, in the laws of lending money, So the Tur, we'll see in Marmukah number 5, holds not like that. Whereas in the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvos, we saw the Rambam holds that this is a mitzvah which is specifying to us a situation within tzedakah. The Tur holds that no, this is a specific situation being specified within the context of chesed, not tzedakah, but chesed. Like he said before, if you lend money, you're probably fulfilling the Hatzor Rachmacha too. So it is sort of covered in that umbrella mitzvah of chesed. And says the Tur, in Kesed Talvas Ami is singling out a particular scenario, but a particular scenario of chesed. The nafkamin of this is a big one. Basic nafkamin would be, does it have to be a poor person? See again, in the Rambam, that this is a particular scenario within tzedakah, so if it's within tzedakah, then it's certainly dealing with poor people. Maybe not the level of poverty that classic tzedakah is given to, but it has to be an honor. But if this is a particular scenario being pulled out and being specified within the world of chesed, no, chesed is the mitzvah of the Hatzor Rachmacha is for any yid. It happens to be that a yid that's an ani, it'll be more of a chesed, it'll be more common, but l'maisa, it'll be for everyone. And in fact, that's what the Tur writes. If you take a look at Marmukah number 5, so the Tur says like this: Mitzvos asay. Again, he starts off sounding like the Rambam, but we'll see where he goes. Mitzvos asay lahavos la'ani Yisrael. There's a mitzvah to lend money to poor yidden, and that's the pasuk. That's the simple pasuk in Kesef Talvas Ami. Now listen to what he says. The language. U'mitzvah gedoylehi yoyser min tzedakah. This is a bigger mitzvah than tzedakah for the same reason that the Rambam said. Shemakabel tzedakah kfar nistach lishel. The guy that's asking for tzedakah, he's already down on his luck. So there's first of all only so much he can do, and he already is embarrassed. V'zeh shalava, but a person that's only borrowing money, adayin le'gilut dekach, he didn't reach that level, so you could accomplish much more with the loan, and he's not embarrassed yet. But again, what was the language of the Rambam? That lending money is the greatest mitzvah within tzedakah. That was the Rambam's language. The Tur, it's a subtle difference, but the Tur says not like that. The Tur says this is greater than the mitzvah of tzedakah. In other words, with the way the Tur is like imagining it, is you have tzedakah on one side, that's tzedakah, and then you have this other mitzvah in Kesef Talvas Ami that's not tzedakah. It happens to be, it's greater than tzedakah, but it's not within the context of tzedakah. Why? Because again, according to the Tur, it's not an aspect of tzedakah. What is it an aspect of? So the Tur continues, "V'afilu ashir shetzarich lilvos." You should know, even though I started off saying that the mitzvah is for poor people, because certainly that's the bigger mitzvah and that's the more of a necessary situation, but you should know, says the Tur, even a wealthy person that needs to borrow money, Lefi Shah, at this moment he doesn't have any cash, whatever the case may be, so he needs to have a loan. Also mitzvah l'havai, so you should know it's also mitzvah to lend him money, ula ha'na'isai, and to benefit him as well. Af b'dvarmi, if you don't have money to lend him, or you could give him good advice. L'yatzei etzai genes, like to give him advice in business. That's also chesed. In other words, what's the Tur saying over here? Again, what the Tur is telling us is not like the Rambam, that this is a category. This is within the category of chesed, and now that it's within the category of chesed, aleph. Maybe it's greater than tzedakah. It's not tzedakah at all. It's not tzedakah. It's greater than tzedakah maybe. And number two, halacha l'maisa, more of a bigger nafkamina, is that it does not only apply to aniyim. It applies to ashim as well, if they happen to need a loan. So that's the opinion of the Tur. That's the opinion of the Tur. Now, by the way, going back to similar, like the way I presented with the Rambam, in the Tur, now that we have a general mitzvah, we have to rachak, right? And you have a particular scenario in Kesef Talvas Ami being singled out, so now also you have this similar thing with the Rambam. I wake up in the morning, right, and I have one person saying, here, I'm going to take you to a situation where you can lend someone money, and the other one says, here, let's go pay a shivakol. So it's all chesed. So usually, okay, it's all chesed. I can do whatever I want. Obviously, if I could do both, I'll do both. You know what I'm saying? But whatever the situation is, I can't do both. So usually I would say it's up to me. It's up to whatever you want to do, and if you pick, and if you choose incorrectly, it's nishkeferlich. But no, according to the Tur, you have a general mitzvah of Hatzor Rachmacha, but the pasuk is singling out the Kesef Talvas Ami, which means the pasuk is telling you, whenever you have that particular opportunity of chesed before you, that's the one that you have to choose, and it's not up to you to go in a different direction. That's the malach.
Even though the Hatzor Rachmacha has its own.
So it has its own mitzvah.
Right.
That's the point. Because you still need this mitzvah, because the nafkina would be in terms of this is now the situation you have to choose if other the Hatzor Rachmachas are presented to you. So if you if you have a general mitzvah, if you have the rachmacha, but it's still open ended in terms of how you want to fulfill it.
He's saying that Kes Tavas Ami is a separate mitzvah also, no?
Yeah, it's a separate mitzvah, but it's within the category of chesed. And
even though they each have their own psukim, it's still separate.
Yeah. It'll still be counted as. That's the point. It's counted as its own mitzvah because it's relevant for it to be counted as its own mitzvah. Because now that it's counted as its own mitzvah, it's now you now have to pick that particular, option. If it wasn't its own mitzvah, and it's just subsumed in that general v'yavdei rachmanecha or the general tzedakah, then if I have other ways to fulfill the v'yavdei rachmanecha or other ways to fulfill tzedakah, it's up to me still. But now that it's telling you, no, im kesed talvasami, then that means that now that's the path I have to choose if that presents itself, whether it be as opposed to other tzedakahs like the Rambam, or as opposed to other cheseds like the Tur. But that's how.
So like a double mitzvah, or like.
If you do it, you would be makayim multiple mitzvahs at the same time. The truth is, in the Chavetz Chaim in his introduction to Havas Chesed, he goes through like that. He says like, how many mitzvahs do you fulfill when you give tzedakah? So he goes to like a save and loisas, like a whole slew of things. Same thing over here. If I lend a Jew money, so I'm makayim and kesef talvazam, right? Let's say I'm makayim tzedakah, makayim chesed, mahu afata. There can be many mitzvahs that I'm makayim. So you have a lot of l'shem yichus to say, but the fact that we do have in kesef talvazam being singled out, the halachic nafkamina is that it's not just up to you to choose one of these opportunities for chesed or tzedakah. This is the one that you have to choose, right? So again, like I said, if you could do everything, then gevaldik, right? So if you have enough time in the day, you have to be mevakar chaylim, you have to be menachem avel, and a person needs a loan. So if you could do all three, then nevada, do all three. But in a situation where for whatever reason you can't do all three, which one to pick? So then it's not up to you anymore. Im kesed talvasam. So those are the two opinions we have so far. Sefer Mitzvos, the Rambam, that's tzedakah, and the Tur, that it's chesed. Good so far? Okay, not too late for everyone? Okay. Third opinion, okay? The third opinion is like this. The third opinion is the Rambam himself in Mishnah Torah. Now this is something that it happens. It's not often, but it does happen where the Rambam will write something and pass in a certain way in Sefer Mitzvos, but then when it gets to Mishnah Torah, he'll change his opinion and understand things differently. It does happen. It's not a kasha. These things do happen. The Rambam, just a little bit of understanding. The Rambam wrote why this is like a little bit of a chiddush, because the Rambam wrote Sefer Mitzvos, which is again listing the 613. He wrote that as an introduction to Mishnah Torah. And that's how he writes in his introduction to his introduction, to everything. He writes that this is my sefer. I'm writing Sefer Mitzvahs, which is like just headlines of what the mitzvahs are, and then I will expand upon them in my big book of Mishnah Torah. So it is a little bit funny for him to change his opinion from Sefer Mitzvahs to Mishnah Torah, but we do find such a thing. So again, in Sefer Mitzvahs, the Rambam's opinion was that in Kesef Talvas Ami was part of tzedakah, but in Mishnah Torah it seems not like that. No, I'll show you why. Take a look at Marmukah number 7. Okay, Marmukah number 7. This is a Rambam in Hilchos Matnas Aniyim. Okay, Matnas Aniyim is the halachas of tzedakah. That's where tzedakah, mitzvahs, and halachas should be found. And the Rambam tells us over there that there are hierarchies in terms of giving tzedakah. Okay, so let's see it together inside. Shemaina Milas, Marmukah number 7. So Shemaina Milas Yesh B'Tzedakah Zu L'Mayla Mizu. There are 8 different levels of giving tzedakah, one higher than the other. Maila Gedoyla, number 1, the top one. Maila Gedoyla She'in L'Mal Mena. The greatest level of tzedakah, the strongest way to give tzedakah, is Zehamachzik Biyad Yisol Shemach. That's to support and help someone, a yid that's down on his luck. He's not mamish poor yet, but he needs help. The nice and light, and you give him something to help him to not fall into poverty. What could you do to give him? So that's matana, give him a gift, or halva, or you can give him a loan, or you go into business with him, right? Or you find him a job. To support his hands, to give him strength. Actually, it's dark that he shouldn't get to a situation where he has to ask. And says the Rambam, this particular situation of what? Of helping a person before he falls into real poverty, by helping him in all those different ways. So we have a pasuk to tell us this, which is V'chazakta bai. It's a new pasuk we haven't seen until now. It says in pasuk v'chazakta bai that a poor person you should strengthen, you should support. Ger v'soisha v'chayimach, a ger, a soisha, people that don't usually have a lot of money, people that need help, you should support them and they should live with you. Kleimer hachazik bai. In other words, like hold his hand, support him. Actually, before he falls, we start, and then you're gonna have to give a lot of tzedakah. So help him out first. Okay. Now this would be the scenario where the Rambam would tell us in Kesef Tal V'Sami, right? In other words, the Rambam is telling us what's the highest level of tzedakah. What's the greatest level of tzedakah? The optimum is what? Is a yid that has not become mamish poverty stricken yet. He needs help. So this is the best way to do tzedakah, where it's like the biggest bang for your buck. Before he's embarrassed, this is the opportunity to do it. So if I was the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvos and writing this now, what I would say is, okay, the greatest level of tzedakah is before he's down on his luck, help him before he gets to a low place. And what's the example to do that with? Give him a loan, and the pasuk to prove it is in Kesef Tal V'Zam. That's not what the Rambam says. What the Rambam does is, yes, this is the greatest level of tzedakah to help him before he gets down on his luck. How do you do it? The first example is not a loan. The first example the Rambam gives is giving him a gift. And then he says a loan, and then he says go into business with him, and then he says find him a new job, which is all true. And then he quotes a pasuk, not in Kesef Tal V'Sami, still a sort of a general pasuk of support poor people, help them, be mechazik them. Again, if the Rambam in Mishnah Torah was following the way he learned in Sefer Mitzvos, then first of all, the most important, the number one example should be lending. And the pasuk to use to back this up is in Kesef Tal V'Sami. That's in fact one of the 613 itself. So the Rambam is avoiding that. He's avoiding halva being the number one example. He just throws it amongst a few of them. And he quotes a pasuk of Echzakta, which is a nice pasuk, but it's not in Kesef Tal V'Sami. And nowhere in Hilchos Ma'anas Aniyim, in all the halachas of tzedakah in the Rambam, does he ever quote this pasuk of Kesef Tal V'Sami? Okay, so it must be that in Sefer in Mishnah Torah, he's not going with his opinion in Sefer Mitzvos. So what's the other option? So the option is a tour. That in Kesef Tal V'Sami is a mitzvah, but it's in the context of chesed. The problem is, there's another place where the Rambam talks about chesed, and he gives many examples of chesed, of Bikur Chaylim, and Menachem Ovel, and just, being nice to other Yidden, and that's in Hilchos Deis. And nowhere over there does he talk about the concept of lending a Jew money. So the two places that this mitzvah should be in theory, either it's in Hilchos Tzedakah, in Hilchos Ma'anas Aniyim, or it's in like Hilchos Chesed, which is in Sefer Amada, and this is not talked about in either place. Where does the Rambam talk about in Kesef Tal V'Sami in Mishnah Torah? So the Rambam in Maramaka number 8, the place is in Hilchos Malva V'Loiva, the laws of lending money. Okay, now that's not so crazy, right? But let's see what he says. Mitzvah asay lahalvas ani Yisrael. Says the Rambam, there is a mitzvah to lend money to poor Yidden. Shenemer in Kesef Tal V'Sami esa ani imach. Okay. Yochel Rishus. So you might think, again, like the Medrash said, you might think that this pasuk is only a voluntary thing. If you lend money, no, tam learner habi tabiten, and so on. And mitzvah zugedoyla min atzedakah, and so on and so forth, the things that we saw before. The Rambam puts this in Hilchos Malva V'Loiva. Okay. So things like this. Whenever you find the Rambam putting something, like the places that the Rambam puts things, so there's always two different schools of thought. One school of thought is that the Rambam puts things in places just because of like practicality. Lending money, so you put in the laws of lending. Okay. The Arachim that go with that, but most Achrayim, especially, the more modern day, Chaim Brisker and the whole yeshiva world, that's not the approach. The assumption is with the Rambam is that even if you'll find a particular section of Mishnah Torah that this particular halacha fits just in practicalities, the Rambam is going to put things where they inherently should be. So if this mitzvah in Kesef Tal V'Sami is fundamentally a tzedakah mitzvah, then it should be in Manas Aniyah. And if it's fundamentally a chesedic mitzvah, it should be in Sefer Amad in Hilchos Deis. If the Rambam is putting this in Hilchos Malva V'Loiva, then what the Rambam is telling us is a completely new idea. That this is not, you have a general mitzvah tzedakah, this is not singling out a scenario of tzedakah. You have a general mitzvah of chesed. This is not singling out a scenario of chesed. This is introducing us to a new mitzvah, which is that there is a mitzvah that part of your business interactions should be lending a Jew money. Hilchas Malvo Loiva in the Rambam, those are the luchs of business. It's the luchs of lending money. It's a choshen mishpat. It's choshen mishpat. It's laws of commerce. The Rambam putting this in the laws of in commerce. What he's telling us is that this is a mitzvah that's a mominous. It's a monetary business commerce parnostic mitzvah. Is that a person spends hours and mamish a huge amount of one's headspace in what? In dealing with money, and so the Torah is introducing us to a new mitzvah, which is that your involvement in your money. There is a new mitzvah that's regarding your money, which is lending a poor person money. So it's not so much chesed. What's the fundamental idea of chesed? The fundamental idea of chesed is this guy needs help him. What's tzedakah? Also, the guy needs financial help him financially. This is not so much that. Although yes, the situation the Torah is telling us to do is certainly, it is chesed and it is tzedakah. It is helping the person. But that's not the point. The point is, it's almost as if the Rebbeinu Shalom says you have so much money in your bank account, like sanctify it. Like you're being involved in business, you're being involved in commerce, you're being involved in lending and borrowing and all these halachas. There's a mitzvah to be done within the context of Choshen Mishpat, and that's im kesef tal v'sami. Now to bring home, let me tell you a nafkamina to sort of make this point clear. When it comes to the mitzvah of tzedakah and the mitzvah of chesed, so how much tzedakah is a person allowed to give? How much chesed is a person allowed to do with their money? So we know that there is a certain amount that a person has to do. It's meiser, and if a person can afford a fifth. But Chazal tell us, B'usha hiskinu, that there was a takana that Chazal made, and according to the Rishonim, it's actually Midraisa, that there's a halacha that one is not allowed to give more money for tzedakah and more money for chesed than a chaimish. That's the amount that a person is allowed to. More than that is not. Now, maybe as Hashem over the weeks we'll talk about that. There are situations that are not under that category, but that's the general rule. Takana susha, that's what it's called. Now that takana though, that's specific to what? To tzedakah v'chesed. Tzedakah v'chesed, there was a takana made, not to just spend all your money. But when it comes to this mitzvah im kesef tal v'sami, here's the question: is im kesef tal v'sami, this mitzvah of lending money, does it have that cap of a chaimish? Or do we say no, the person, if he can afford it, he can lend even more than a fifth? Does it have that cap? Well, this can be a major nafkami between the Rambam and Mishnah Torah and these other opinions. If it's in the category of tzedakah, or if it's in the category of chesed, it has a cap. Every tzedakah and chesed, which is financial, has a cap of a fifth. But if you're talking about, it's not a tzedakah of a chesed mitzvah. This is a mitzvah within the context of commerce. That commerce, just as there's halachas governing how to spend your money and what money is yours, what money is not yours, there's halachas governing how a certain aspect of your business, a certain aspect of your finances, should be in this situation if it presents itself to lending a poor person money, not because of chesed and tzedakah. It's choshen mishpat. Your money, in order for it to be kosher money, your financial portfolio should include within it lending a Jew money. It's not because of tzedakah chesed, it's because that's what a holy portfolio looks like. It's choshen mishpat. There's no takana susha for that. Now, this is not just my opinion. If you take a look at Marmukah number 9, the Avis Chesed, the Chavetz Chaim talks about this question. Does takana susha apply to this? Now, the Chavetz Chaim over here is not coming from this angle of like what category the mitzvah is, but he does present the different possibilities. So take a look over here. So it's in Dina Mitzvahs Halva. It's right in the first parak Aleph Dalet. The Kama Yi Hashir Shechayva Tar Lahalves Ish L'Re'eh. So the question the Chavetz Chaim is dealing with: what's the shear? How much money is a person supposed to or allowed to lend out to other people? So it says the Chavetz Chaim, Lo mitzasi ba'ani mefresh with the Chazal shir. So the truth is, I've not found in Chazal, and that means that it's not in Chazal, a particular shir of how to fulfill this mitzvah, how much, how less. No, it's not clear. So it says the Chavetz Chaim, so maybe you'll point to tzedakah and say, okay, whatever the amount is over there, meiser, chaimish. So the ein lema lezamen and tzedakah. It says you can't learn it from tzedakah to say that the halachas of tzedakah would apply necessarily. The caps and so on should apply to over here. The sham, first of all, he says a simple difference. He says the sham hashir l'chol yoyser uchamish b'nechas. So like over there would be a fifth, right? That would be the cap. Why? The hasim l'noisen l'chalutin. Over there, when you give tzedakah, you're not getting it back. So I understand it could be a cap of a fifth because we don't want a person to just give everything away to tzedakah and then they have to come on to tzedakah. But over here, we're not talking about giving it away. We're talking about a halva, a loan. But halva, bolei hamam b'chazara, you're going to hopefully get the money back. So you could then make the argument maybe there's no cap made, right? Now again, what we're saying is that according to the Ram Mishnah Torah, also fundamentally it's not a tzedakah v'chesed oriented mitzvah for that cap to apply. When Chacham and Usha made this halacha of a fifth and no more, they were certainly the pasuk that they were building it on is in Parshas Vayetze when Yaakov Avinu was having the dream of the ladder. So he says, Hashem Yisbarach, if you help me out, so you give me everything I need, and I survive with Esav. Kol asher titinli aser esren elach. I will tithe upon a tithe. I'll give tzedakah. I'll give it a tenth of it and a tenth. That's a fifth, right? So I'll give a fifth of my money to tzedakah. So Chazal say Takanas Usha was, you see the cap is a fifth, not more. But again, what was that talking about? Tzedakah and chesed. It was talking about giving money l'shem tzedakah, l'shem chesed. But if it's not a question of tzedakah chesed, it's more of like this is what a Jewish portfolio should look like. It should choshen mishpat, your money, the commerce, Jewish business, Jewish interactions financially should include within them lending money if need be. That's not tzedakah chesed. That's not hinted to in the pasuk of Yaakov Avinu. He's not talking about what his portfolio should look like. He's talking about things that he's going to voluntarily do to show chesed to others as a response to the kindness Hashem is doing to him. Yaakov Avinu was talking about tzedakah and chesed. He's not talking about what kosher money looks like or what a kosher portfolio looks like. It's a different category. Chazal Masaki and Usha in tzedakah v'chesed, not in Hilchas Malv V'loiva. If in that's where if in Kesed Talvas Ami is in Malv V'loiva, then certainly it's not capped by a fifth. Ulehapach Gamkin in Tzvar, 3 lines before the end, the Chavis Chaim says, okay, so maybe you should lend everything. Not that you could. Maybe you should. Let's say a guy comes to you and like the people are asking for loans and it's not everything you got. So maybe you have to do that. So it says that's also illogical to say all the money you have available right now that you should just have no choice but to give that all out as a gemach for loans. That's also illogical. So then what is it? So we don't have a particular cap of a fifth, but it's not completely infinite. It doesn't go all the way to everything you own. You can't just give everything you own. Maybe you'll need the money soon. You don't know what bills might come up. You're not going to have any money. So what do you do? So says the Chofetz Chaim. So it's most likely the Tolia Mitzvah Kolecha that there is no cap, but it's certainly not everything you own. Each person has to evaluate what they could afford. That's all. What does it mean to afford? Certain people are going to be more nervous about what's around the corner. Some people are less nervous. It's each one according to their own situation financially and mentally. So that's what it's going to be. It's not going to be. There is no rigid percentage or numbers to put on this mitzvah. So whatever you're able to do, considering your particular situation and things might come up and your, concerns about that. That's what you have to do. But that's the basic thing that we have so far. Again, so summing it all up, we have 3 basic opinions of what this mitzvah is. Is this a particular scenario being spelled out in tzedakah? In which case, it'll only apply to a poor person, Aleph, and it'll govern you in terms of how you give tzedakah. That's the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvos. Or you have another opinion of the Tur, which is this is a particular situation being spelled out in Chesed, which means it's not just a poor person; it's not any yid. And number 2, it governs you how to spend your money in terms of Chesed. Or you have the third opinion of the Rambam. It's not Chesed, it's not tzedakah. This is telling you what Jewish commerce should look like, what a Jewish portfolio should look like, to make sure that you have an OU on your portfolio, to make sure that you're willing to lend money to a Jew that needs. Of what this mitzvah means, and we'll see if it has to do with these particular opinions. No, the flyer says you have to, it's going to be halacha and opinions. So just a few minutes to explain what the opinions of this mitzvah is. What's amazing is, again, so By the way, one last thing in the Rambam, for example, just one last nakuda. The pasuk from the very beginning there was something funny with the pasuk, right? Im kesef talasan. If you lend money, and you have to have Rabbi Shmuel to come say no. It doesn't mean if. It means you have to. So why does it say im? No. So it's just say kesef talasan. Right? Why you have to say im, and then you have another pasuk. You have to need a medrash to tell you not like that. So it's if it's stuck or chesed, it's a kasha. In the Rambam, that it's a mitzvah within choshen mish, within commerce. Then you could make the argument. Again, I'm not going to swear by this, but maybe you can say the whole subject matter that this mitzvah is built on. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be commerce. I mean, business and portfolios is like sort of man-made. It's in order to survive. So yes, we understand it's hard for a person to just mamish live off the grid, everything on their own. So we have this situation of where I have something, you have something. So we came up with this idea of first bartering, and then bartering always doesn't work. So we came up with this idea here. This object is going to be. We'll all agree that this is valuable, and that's where money comes from. And it's the whole idea of malva v'loiva is fundamentally something that doesn't have to be. But now it is. Now that it is, so now there's a particular hechsher on your business transactions if you're willing to lend money if need be. So the pasuk is saying you have to lend money. The whole thing is fundamentally built on something that's only an if. In Kesef Davos, once there's this sort of, completely kind of arbitrary thing that all of humanity decided upon, which is commerce and business, now in Kesef Talvasami. So maybe that's why the pasuk says im, but it doesn't really mean if, because fundamentally it is dealing with an if. It is dealing with something that doesn't have to be. Okay, that's just a thought. Okay, so what's going? Let's put it this way: what's happening within the nefesh when a Jew lends money to another Jew? Because that's the question to ask in terms of understanding what the mitzvah is in pnimis. Not why there's such a mitzvah. That's not the pnimistic question. A pnimistic question is what's happening within the soul when this mitzvah is performed, or another way to say it, what is this mitzvah in the soul? Because everything we do externally, every mitzvah we have, which is practical and physical, is a reflection of a reality within the nefesh, and a reality within the relationship between us and the Bari Olam. Chazal say that the Rebbeinu Shalom keeps mitzvahs. Somebody keeps mitzvahs. It means that in its root, what every mitzvah is just another lens through which God's presence comes into our lives. And when we do a mitzvah, we're opening up that channel. So what channel is opened by this particular mitzvah of lending a Jew money? So what's unique to this mitzvah, this is my idea, and then I wasn't confident because when it comes to these inyanim, you can't, you have to ensure. So I check the Kamarna, as the Kamarna says, so fine. So it gives me chizik and other things that I come up with, maybe I'm not so far off. So it's like this. In the Kisser we find the following idea. It's rooted in the Gemara Nida, which we're going to speak B'tznius, but the Gemara says that Ein Isha Mesaberes M'Bi Rishayna. Chazal say that a woman, back in the times of Chazal, now a little bit different physically, especially as a woman gets older, but at a particular age, a particular time, a woman would not become pregnant from the first moment, from the first intimacy with the husband. Only from the second, bia and on, the second interaction and on. Why? So Chazal say because the first bia is eino l'saisa kli. It's to make her able to receive the seed from the husband to then become pregnant. But the first bia is not to impregnate. It can't to impregnate. It's to make her able to become pregnant the next time. In the Kisser Ari we find that's a truth down here on planet Earth, but that's reflective of the Chassan and Kal of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Jewish people. Which means there's two types of shefa, there's two types of hashpa, of energy the Rebbeinu Shalom gives to us. One type of energy is the Rebbeinu Shalom gives kaichas and life and good things, and all good things. That's called becoming pregnant. Becoming pregnant means that I don't have, and the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Chassan, gives the kala, the tipa zera, that piece of genetic material, and now the kala can do amazing things with it, turn it into a person, but ultimately what the kala has is given to her from the chassan, and she's sort of just running with the ball. But there's another type of shefa that precedes that. And the shefa that precedes that is the Rebbeinu Shalom giving you, and let me explain. In order for the Rebbeinu Shalom to give us that gift of life and taiv and good and just to become pregnant, then so just like it is in this world where the kala, again I have to speak in a nice way, the kala has to motivate the chassan to give that shefa. So too the dynamic of this world is the Rebbeinu Shalom is the chassan. He wants to give shefa. He wants to give good things, parnas and taiv and ruchnias and all good things, all decisions. But there's a klal which is that we have to motivate it from down here. We have to want it. We have to ask for it. We have to daven, do mitzvahs. Avodas Hashem. We ascend up. We go up, and the Rebbeinu Shalom comes down. That's the way it works. But what gives us the strength even to have that awakening from below? That's called the Bein Rishon. So here's the dynamic. The Rebbeinu Shalom will give us shefa, bracha, and hatzlacha on all levels after we draw it down, after we make some awakening from below to earn it. But in order to give us the strength and the motivation and the ability to earn it, that's the matan minashamayim initially. So just as the chassan makes the kala into a kli to then become pregnant, so too says the Arizal, the Rebbeinu Shalom implants within Nishmas Yisrael the very ability and the very desire of becoming a Yid, of becoming a better Jew, to then be more the Rebbeinu Shalom to give. So we're standing there like, oh, we got so much shefa and bracha because of our avodah. We say Tillim, and the Rebbeinu Shalom answers us, and we pat ourselves on the back. Skavaldik was mamashas, and it's true. And the brachas that come to you, you've earned because you said Tillim. But who gives you the kaiches to say Tillim? Who puts the desire in your heart to say Tillim? It's true. You then have to use that desire and actually, bring it out in a real way, and you have to open up the sefer and do it. But ultimately, there's a chazal that says the following thing. Chazal say that it's an amazing thing. The Rebbeinu Shalom says to Klal Yisrael, "Who gave you the house to put a mezuzah up? Put a mezuzah. You did a mitzvah. Who gave you the house to have the mezuzah on it? It's the Rebbeinu Shalom, right? So it's and the Chazal go through all mitzvahs like that. Who gave you an arm to put tefillin on it? It's the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's called Bein Rishon. That inyan of the Rebbeinu Shalom giving you shefa for you to be able to start your avodah, to then earn the ikar shefa, that's motivated, that's nisayr from this mitzvah of lending a Jew money. Because what's the concept of lending a Jew money? As we saw in the Rambam and Torah, everyone agrees to this basic fact, which is by lending a Jew money, it means you're giving the opportunity for him to stand on his own 2 feet before he's just receiving tzedakah. A guy that's mamish destitute, so he doesn't have anything on his own. Every single time he needs tzedakah. But if you lend him money before he needs that, it means you're giving him or the Rambam's example, like give him a job and things like that. You're giving him the ability for him to find his own parnas. When you not only is that a gevaldik chesed to the guy or a good mitzvah or whatever, or it's good for your portfolio. What's being initiated, what's being nisayra, what that reflective of is this in of Bein Rishon, of the Rebbeinu Shalom giving us the kaiches for us to do our avodah, for us to make all the amazing accomplishments we were able to do as Yidden. That itself is given to us, matana min hashamayim, to be able to do those kaiches. So our avodah as Yidden is what? Is that we can take things of this world and mamish bring it up to Rebbeinu Shalom, and the klal is the more we take of this world and we bring up, things go up, good things come down. But what gives you the strength to bring things up? That's also because of something that came down initially. That's the first shefa, that's the mitzvah of Imkesef Tal V'Sami. So Hashem should help us by learning this. It should obviously be mitzvah lasses to kind this mitzvah, if need be, such a situation arises. But it should also be ma'ir min hashamayim lamala, what the root of the mitzvah is. The Rebbeinu should give us shefa, bracha, and hatzlacha on all levels to give us that kick a little bit and give us that kaiches to then serve him properly, to then be zaycha to the ikr shefa, bracha, and hatzlacha that Hashem is coming our way. Okay, shekach. We should have a great night. It's usually going to be short.